Scientists and campaigners launch a new drive to find a cure for AIDS. But despite progress in the fight against HIV, young African Americans are still being disproportionately affected. You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. 3 decades ago, it was considered a death sentence for anyone who caught it. But these days, more and more people are able to live with HIV/AIDS, thanks to advances in treating the disease. This week, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved a new drug aimed at preventing HIV infection. And on Thursday, scientists launched a new strategy towards the big prize of HIV/AIDS research, a cure. The United Nations AIDS program says AIDS-related deaths fell to 1.7 million last year, down from a peak of 2.3 million in 2005, a decline driven by greater access to medication in low to middle-income countries. Despite the advances, much work remains to be done. The United Nations also estimates that worldwide, some 34 million people still live with HIV, and that the epidemic could last for another 40 to 50 years. In the United States, it's African Americans who are disproportionately affected, making up half of the 1 million people living with HIV. And according to a new report, AIDS is affecting black gay men in the United States on a scale unseen among any other group in the developed world. Ahead of the 19th International AIDS Conference taking place here in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Barack Obama has faced criticism from campaigners for what they say is lukewarm priority on fighting the virus. Stephen G. Deeks is professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and one of those involved in the new push towards a cure. He discussed the state of current AIDS research and strategies for the future.
And here we are in 2012. We have 25 drugs, multiple combinations, and they work very well. And people now are living much, much longer. But now that we've achieved what I think is the best that we can achieve with these drugs, we're realizing some limitations. And the chief limitation is that in order for these drugs to work, they have to be taken every day for decades, okay? And delivering drugs to 33 million people, day in, day out, for decades and decades, is going to be a major challenge. So, now that we've actually achieved what we can with the current strategies, the field is beginning to shift toward really what we think is the optimal intervention, which is essentially to come up with a short-term, safe, affordable, scalable intervention that will essentially either eliminate the virus completely or modify the immune system so it can control the virus in the absence of therapy. Okay? A cure.
So, how much longer will we be fighting HIV/AIDS? With me to discuss this in the studio are Michael Weinstein, president of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Next to him, Phill Wilson, the founder and executive director of the Black AIDS Institute. And also joining us, David Margolis, an HIV expert from the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of North Carolina. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Important conference taking place in Washington right now, the 19th AIDS Conference, and there seems to be an air of hope that we could be seeing the beginning of the end of this epidemic. Michael, is that optimism justified?
Well, I think that the rate of scientific progress that's taken place in the last few years is remarkable, and in that sense, you know, if we can project ahead from that, I think that we can see a light at the end of the tunnel. But you know, when you look at the fact that we have almost 2 million people a year dying, and we have 2.5 million people a year becoming infected, it's still a living, breathing problem today. And I think that we really don't have a magic bullet on the horizon.
Okay. David Margolis, where is AIDS research focused right now? I mean, we have these drug cocktails which are able to control the disease, but what about a cure?
Well, AIDS research broadly is focused in several areas. The new area is trying to cure the infection. That doesn't reduce the importance of studies to try to learn how to prevent infection with vaccines or other things and how to get treatment to all the people that need it. But I think the field is now realizing that unless we also figure out how to eradicate infection, how to create curative therapies, we will be sort of locked into an endless loop of treating millions of people for decades and decades, which is really not going to be acceptable over the long term.
Right. Phil, I mean, as I mentioned, we now have these drugs which can control the disease. But here's a frightening number. Only 1 in 4 Americans have this virus under control. That's just 1/4. What happens to the other 3/4?
Well, number one, we have to get more people into treatment. We have a challenge. 1 in 5 Americans who are living with HIV don't know they're infected. So we have to do a better job of testing. We certainly have to do a better job of getting people on treatment. As Michael said, we've had tremendous scientific breakthroughs over the last few years. Now, I happen to believe we, in fact, do have the tools to end the AIDS epidemic. There is a gaping hole, and that's the vaccine question, which we have to resolve. But the question now, and the issue around this conference, is whether or not we can use those tools in an effective manner, and whether or not the tools are as good as they need to be. So I think the promise is there, but I think that there's lots of work that needs to be done if we're going to really end the AIDS epidemic.
Okay, Michael, what about access to drugs in the United States?
Well, we have people on waiting lists for drug. That number reached almost 10,000 last year. And people are getting a mixed message when they hear that. We're telling them to get tested, and if they're positive, to get in treatment. But we're getting a mixed message in that regard. Drug pricing is a major issue, not only in the United States, but across the world. Right. It is not sustainable to be spending $20,000 per patient per year. And the largest AIDS drug manufacturer is one of the most profitable companies in the S&P 500, and is the CEO of that company, Gilead Sciences, John Martin, is making more than $50 million a year. So that's a really big limitation on the access to drug, not only in the United States, but across the world.
So when you say it's unsustainable, I mean, what's the alternative? Just bring the price down? Or
bringing the price down is a necessity. I mean, we're only treating worldwide 7 million people out of 34 million people who are infected. So we're only treating 20% of the people who need it. And we can't treat the remaining millions without lower drug prices. And so, I mean, the fact that every new drug costs 30% more than the previous drug is absolutely going to kill this effort if that continues. And most of the market for these drugs is the government. Most of the market for it is being paid for by the U.S. federal government. And yet the companies are permitted to price these things at whatever price they choose.
Right. And Michael is right that we definitely have to address the pricing question, whether we're talking about domestically or internationally. But Michael's also right that it's not a silver bullet, that's not how we're going to solve this problem. We have to address the pricing issues, but we're not going to treat ourselves out of the HIV epidemic as well. No, we have to do a better job on prevention, both marrying behavioral prevention and biomedical interventions. We need to ramp up our efforts to try to get to a vaccine. I think curative research is critically important. We have had some remarkable breakthroughs. Just last week, the FDA approved pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is a tool. Again, I think some people are thinking about it as a silver bullet. It's not. It's a tool that will be appropriate for some populations. But if we can prevent new infections, if we can find a cure, ultimately that needs to be the goal.
Well, I would differ a little bit with that. The best way to, I believe we can treat our way out of this disease. I think ultimately that it's a big limitation to have to take a pill every day. Yeah. And I think we should be looking for treatments that don't require daily dosing. But the reality is the best form of prevention, other than condoms, is a person who's positive being on treatment. That renders them 96% non-infectious. Okay, and there are countries around the world, rich and poor, that are controlling AIDS. The biggest limitation in controlling AIDS, domestically and globally, is political will. And we've seen a real lapse in leadership by the Obama administration in comparison to the past. This is the first year where they actually asked for reductions in funding, and we have $1.4 billion unspent in the international program. I mean, the president is not using the bully pulpit to talk about prevention or really mobilizing the country, and that's what's needed.
Okay, let me go to David Margolis. David Margolis, as we look at the search for a cure for AIDS, I mean, there's been certain markers along the way, and one of them is something called the Berlin patient. This was a patient who had AIDS in Berlin, in Germany, but who was cured while being treated for another disease. How much hope did that give scientists that they may be able to find a way here? They might be able to find the target and where they want to go to find this cure?
Well, I think there were a few scientists working on latency, that is how HIV infection persists despite its being controlled by current therapy. But this sort of accidental experiment of nature, actually, because it wasn't totally accidental, but this event proved that it was possible to eradicate infection in a person that was infected, a human. And the way it happened isn't fully understood. It involved bone marrow transplants and chemotherapy and the sorts of interventions that we would never want to employ, widely or even in a limited way. But it showed that it was possible. And the fact that it demonstrated that this event could biologically happen, I think really opened up the field to ask, how can it be done, and can we do the research necessary to bring the tools into clinics and hospitals across the world and provide this as a treatment for everyone.
And then, of course, we had another group of people who were infected who appeared to have cured themselves naturally, that they managed to eliminate the virus naturally.
So these are people we call elite controllers. Their immune systems control virus infection very stringently. They're very rare, and we understand some of the reasons that elite controllers are able to control HIV, but not all. And so that's another kind of cure that people are working towards, the so-called functional cure, to take an infected person who doesn't control the virus very well and change their immune system or their cellular makeup or their immune responses in some way such that they can control the virus without treatment, without drugs, without being infectious to anyone else, and without with having a healthy immune system.
But to be clear, those patients are still infected with HIV.
Right. In the functional cure scenario, you're not cured, but the goal, at least, would be that you don't require drug therapy and you're not infectious to anyone else and you have a normal lifespan. So these are aspirational goals. They're very hard to understand at this point, and that's why we would need to do a lot of work to move to those goals.
But one of the points that Michael made is worthy of a little time, I believe, and that is the notion of treatment as prevention, and what we know about effective suppression of viral load, and that it is a problem that not only 20% of HIV positive folks who are in care have a suppressed viral load. Michael's right that if we can get people into care, we can get them on treatment, we can keep them on treatment, we can suppress their viral load, we can reduce the transmissibility of HIV by 96%. You combine that with both the biomedical prevention tools that we have and the behavior prevention tools that we have, and we can be much, much better off than we are today. And when we talk about ending the AIDS epidemic, and this week during the International AIDS Conference, there's going to be lots of talk about ending the AIDS epidemic. It's about putting all those pieces together. It's about putting the best of what we have been doing and combining it with the promise of what's before us.
Right. There's no single answer to this. It's going to be combining all of the best approaches in all the aspects of the epidemic.
Okay. Phill, I want to get your take on something else, something that Michael mentioned, and that is the political will, or the lack thereof. When we look at the Obama administration, as Michael pointed out, funding's been reduced. Also the fact that the president is not going to be attending the conference.
Well, you know, Michael and I have been friends for a very, very long time, and I think that we probably disagree on the analysis that there's been a lack of leadership by the Obama administration. Certainly, there's not been an administration in the 30-plus years of the epidemic that has done all the things that we have wanted. Now, and there's certainly things that this administration, that I, for one, and I'm sure others, would have liked for them to have done that they have not done. But I do think it's important to also acknowledge the things that this administration has done. You know, the development of a national HIV/AIDS strategy, that is critically important. Right. You know, the United States for the longest time did not have a national plan. And as my grandmother used to say, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So that's important. You know, the push around the Affordability Care Act. I think, quite frankly, you know, health care reform may very well be the most important thing that could ever happen for people living with HIV, and we need to acknowledge that. I think that we live in a very, very difficult economic times, and I think that there are choices that are being made that are difficult choices to be made. They're not always the choices that I would make. I don't always agree with the president, but I do think that the president has demonstrated leadership on this issue time and time again.
But symbolism counts, okay? You got 25,000 people coming to DC for this conference, okay? There are 34 million people living with this disease. Almost 2 million of them are going to die, and the president can't see fit to travel less than a mile from the White House to attend this conference. I mean, Thabo Mbeki, who had a terrible position on HIV, addressed the conference in Durban. But also, I mean, the U.S. all across the globe is cutting back on its commitment. I mean, right today, there's a clinic closing in Durban, South Africa, where the U.S. government is saying, well, let the local health department take that over. But also, I mean, you haven't seen either in the rhetoric of this administration or in their actions concerted efforts. And again, Bush, no one expected Bush to launch a global AIDS program, okay? And that program under his administration grew from an authorization of $15 billion to $48 billion. Senator Obama voted for $48 billion for that program. Okay, President Obama is now only appropriating $6.7 billion, and he's asking for that to be cut next year. So I mean, actions matter, symbolism matters, and so I mean, you know, we can agree to disagree, but you know, we're not the only ones who feel this way. You're going to see a wave of activism at this conference. You're going to see a rebirth of AIDS activism at this conference, and most of it is going to be directed at the president. And I think sometimes that we give a pass to Democrats or to liberals, but they should be just as accountable as anybody else.
I agree with Michael that leadership should be held accountable. And I also agree with Michael that action matters. And symbolism, yes, it does matter. But I think that in this particular case, yes, George Bush did PEPFAR. PEPFAR was remarkable. I think many of us didn't give him sufficient credit for PEPFAR. I think we should own that as well, or at least I will own that. PEPFAR is fantastic. But on the same measure, George Bush, did not speak at AIDS conferences either. In fact, under George Bush, there was a dramatic reduction in U.S. presence and the ability of the U.S. government to even attend the international.
He's attending this conference, though.
No, by video, just like the president. He's attending this conference.
Let me get to another issue, Phil, and this is the rate of infection among black homosexual men, which is disproportionately high. We have a graphic here, which we'll take a look at. According to a report from the Black AIDS Institute, new HIV infections among gay African Americans rose 20% between 2006 and 2009. Among younger males aged 13 to 24, the rate of new infections is 48%. Gay black men account for 38% of new HIV infections among male homosexuals, but African Americans make up only 9% of all gay males in the United States. Why is the rate so high among African American men?
Well, this is a tragic story that has not been told. Black gay men in America are arguably the most at-risk population on the planet. The epidemic among black MSMs, black men who have sex with men in the United States, is worse than anywhere else in the developed world and competes with the type of epidemic that we see in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa, and Zimbabwe and Uganda. There are a number of reasons. Number one is that the stigma that makes it difficult for people to be willing to get tested for HIV, to seek treatment for HIV, to even acknowledge that they are at risk, and therefore continue to put themselves at risk. There are structural barriers. Also in that report, we look at what's happening around social economic issues. Now that the percentage of Black MSMs who live below the poverty line and economic issues, those also
Make
contribute
that connection for us. The prevalence of AIDS among poor people is much higher than among the rest of the population.
Absolutely, it's much higher for poor people for a host of reasons. Chief among them is access to health care. Beyond just ARVs or retrovirals, just access to basic health care is a challenge, for poor
But bottom
people.
line is, homophobia kills.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, and the reality is it hits hardest in certain communities where there's an ostracization not only from their own families, but also within the gay community there's intense racism. So, when you devalue a life, there are consequences for that. And this is an area where I think the political leadership could help as well.
Okay.
I think we shouldn't ignore the impact of economics as well. We see this in our clinic in North Carolina all the time. People can't drive in from 3 counties away because they can't fill their gas tank and get to clinic. So there are all sorts of obstacles and challenges that we have to address.
But we're not seeing the corollary in poor white gay men that we're seeing in the Black community.
Oh,
So it's
that's, well,
obvious.
I can't speak to numbers, but we certainly have that problem in poor white men in
I think that we have the problem, but it's a matter of magnitude.
Yes.
And what we see among Black, gay, and bisexual men, even when they don't have the issue of long distances to get to a clinic, we see the disparities exist. And we do have to address this issue around homophobia and marginalization in communities because it makes it more difficult to address the epidemic. The other issue among Black gay men is there's a background prevalence that contributes to the spread of disease. Where we're looking in some places where we have a 46% prevalence among Black, gay, and bisexual men, and recently we saw that we see in new cases a 46% increase in incidence. Those things are related to each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to take a look very quickly because we're running out of time to the broader picture around the world. The United Nations says the rate of new HIV infections is actually falling around the world. Let's take a look at this graphic. Between 1997 and 2010, the yearly rate of new HIV infections fell 21%. In sub-Saharan Africa, hit hard by the AIDS epidemic, the rate of new infections has dropped more than 26% since 1997. But the problem there is still serious. The region saw 70% of all new HIV infections in 2010. Michael, does that mean that attitudes have not changed? I mean, we did have this bizarre situation in South Africa, which you alluded to just a moment ago. We had, Thabo Mbeki having this very unorthodox or unusual view on what caused AIDS. We also had a minister in South Africa who said that the cure was to eat beetroot and
garlic,
olive oil and lemon or something like that. It was very bizarre. I mean, there's a need to overcome those kind of things, isn't there?
Well, I'd say, in terms of the Africa situation, first of all, in some areas, you reach a saturation point where everybody who's going to become infected or is going to die has already done so. And it's hard to really account for how much that contributes to falls in infections. But second thing is that the fact that so many people are being treated means that we're breaking the chain of infection there. And I also think that, you build on hope, not desperation.
There have been some success stories. Botswana, I think, has brought down its infection rate.
Yeah, actually, Uganda is the greatest story in terms of that. But you also see it in Asia, in Thailand. You've seen it in Senegal. You see it in Northern Europe. Okay, I mean, the best comparison in terms of what's happening in the United States is how low the rates are in Northern Europe compared to the United States, both wealthy industrialized countries. But I think going back to what I said about concerns about the failure of will or the lack of support from the rich countries. Okay. The war against AIDS has not been won. Okay, now is not the time to retreat, scale back, economize, or otherwise, cut corners.
Or pat yourself on the back and say, certain progress has been made.
Yeah, it's not enough.
Okay, I want to go to David Margolis very quickly. David, we just have about 40 seconds, and I was wondering if you could tell me on a worldwide basis, what kind of collaboration is there between scientists, and also what kind of funding is there available worldwide in the search for a cure?
I think the collaboration has really grown very significantly in the last few years. There's growing collaboration among groups within the U.S. and now with research groups in Europe, Australia, and other parts of the world. So I think as the scientific community focuses on this, we're figuring out ways to broaden the net and work together.
Okay. David Margolis, Michael Weinstein, and Phill Wilson, thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.